The power of perfume is that it seduces you into rooting for a murderer. Murderer. Better than food, man. Good morning, everyone. How are you? Welcome to Better Than Food Book Reviews. It's great to see you. It's great to be back. No damage from Irma. Lucked out on that one, definitely. Seems to have lost power as soon as it hit Florida. Though Miami got hit pretty hard if you've been following the news, and the Keys got hit. I mean, there's like 25% of houses were severely damaged or something. I don't know if that's actually true, but it looks pretty rough. But we're fine. We had a huge branch fall on our little house out back, and but I mean, there was no damage to speak of, and it just meant that I got to use a pole saw for the first time, and spend the day doing yard work, which I should do more often anyways. So it's all gravy. It's good stuff. Hope everybody is doing very well. This is going to be a patron-only review until October as a way of saying thank you for supporting the show through the process of absolute disruption this last month. So thank you very much for everyone who has supported the show and has continued to support the show. It really means a lot to me. And I've been wanting to get to this one for a while. Today is Perfume by Patrick Süskind. Long time coming. Many people have recommended this book. The power of perfume is that it seduces you into rooting for a murderer. You're cheering him on the entire time. The reader is just as manipulated by the author as the 18th century French populace is manipulated by the villain or the protagonist. It's no wonder the book has found such a large audience. It's very clever. It was recommended to me by my good friend who was recommended the book by her good friend. In the middle of reading this, I put on Nirvana for the first time in what felt like a century. And then I realized not too long afterwards that it was somewhere back in my subconscious. This was Kurt Cobain's favorite book, or one that he really enjoyed, apparently. The track Scentless Apprentice off of the album In Utero, awesome track, awesome album, awesome band. For any of you Nirvana fans, obviously a song directly inspired by the book. That is what the main character is. He is a scentless apprentice. The storytelling method is traditional, it's simple, it's straightforward, it's not particularly experimental, and for that reason I'm just going to tell you the entire thing, spoiler alert, Although I think many of you have probably already read this one, so I'm cool with that. Grenouille is a man born without a cent on a hot day in 18th century Paris amid rotting fish and rotting Parisians, amidst the decay of food and all these overpowering odors and sweaty peasants and all of this. That's the setting that he comes into the world in. At first, you think this would be a non-issue, the scent thing, being born without a cent. You think like, oh, well, good, save money on deodorant, right? However, it turns out to be an existential lifelong struggle, right? For identity, for determining who you are, what you are, where you stand in the world. Everybody has their own scent. You know your own scent, although you're probably so used to it that you often don't smell it unless you get really ripe. But I'm sure your significant other really appreciates your scent, or your mother for that matter. But for him, being born without a scent, again, is this existential crisis. Because you see, the irony of all ironies, Grenouille is born with the greatest nose ever. The most sensitive, accurate olfactory abilities in history. Grenouille is French for frog, right? So it reminds me of Fish Boy. His mother is a fish lady in this market, and she doesn't expect him to live, but live he does. And so yeah, it reminds me of Mark Richards' Fish Boy, which I reviewed a while back, although this is definitely better. And Perfume came before Fish Boy. It was published in 1985. He collects scents. He can recall them by himself, scents from his entire life. And he has almost this psychic ability to tell who is where and what they're doing and what they're thinking or they're feeling, and how old they are and their wants or desires, and all these things he can smell. He can sniff all this out. It's as if being and Simultaneously, because he has no scent, he's almost undetectable, essentially. Like, nobody even notices him, or if they do notice him, it's only the slightest bit. You know, he's sort of like a ghost. He doesn't exist, basically. He's just sort of like walking through this world that really does not notice him whatsoever, while he observes and sort of like imbibes everything. He knows the whole world through scent, though he does not have one of his own. So he begins to steal the sense of the living, right? He becomes obsessed with obtaining and possessing the sense of the world for himself, because that's the only enjoyment he gets out of life. That's the only pleasure he finds whatsoever, if you can call it pleasure. He starts combining them and infusing them with one another in his mind by himself, melting and dissolving them and creating new ones. As he grows up, basically without a family, without any sort of love whatsoever, the concept is completely alien to him. He is entirely interior, all inside himself. Because he has no scent, nobody notices him, but he notices everyone and everything. The catalyst for what will become his obsession occurs when he smells this girl who's just coming into womanhood one night in Paris. He follows her, and he is completely seduced by her scent. It's the greatest scent he's encountered, right? It's the smell of love or infatuation or something akin, but, you know, so much more profound. He's never smelled anything like it, and so immediately he's hooked. He becomes so outrageously obsessed, he loses himself, and he kills her, trying to devour and possess the essence of this girl, but he's unable to because he doesn't have the right technique. He doesn't have the tools to possess it, to keep it. He can't keep the scent. It disappears. But he remembers it, right? And that's the first one. And nothing happens as far as murders for a long time after that. He doesn't kill anybody. He just broods and he waits and he studies because he knows now what he has to do. He knows he has to find that scent again and keep it once and for all. Make it better even, improve upon it, right? He must find a way to trap the scents, to keep them forever and to make them his own. Because that's the smell of love, the thing he never had, right? You know? He wants his own scent so he can know what it's like to be loved. All at once, great contentment came over him. Not a drunken one, as in the days when he had celebrated his lonely orgies in the bowels of the mountain. He hides in a mountain for 7 years and does nothing but play with scent in his mind. It's intense. But a very cold and sober contentment, as befits awareness of one's own power. He now knew what he was capable of. Thanks to his own genius, with a minimum of contrivance, he had imitated the odor of human beings, and at one stroke had matched it so well that even a child had been deceived. He now knew that he could do much more. He knew that he could improve this scent. He would be able to create a scent that was not merely human, but superhuman, an angel's scent, so indescribably good and vital that whoever smelled it would be enchanted and with his whole heart would have to love him, Grenouille, the bearer of that scent. Yes, that was what he wanted. They would love him as they stood under the spell of his scent, not just accept him as one of them, but love him to the point of insanity, of self-abandonment. They would quiver with delight, scream, weep for bliss. They would sink to their knees, just as if under God's cold incense, merely to be able to smell him, Grenouille. He would be the omnipotent god of scent, just as he had been in his fantasies in the cave. But this time in the real world and over real people, and he knew that all of this was within his power. For people could close their eyes to greatness, to horrors, to beauty, and their ears to melodies or deceiving words, but they could not escape scent. For scent was a brother of breath. Together with breath, it entered human beings who could not defend themselves against it, not if they wanted to live. And scent entered into their very core, went directly to their hearts, and decided for good and all between affection and contempt, disgust and lust, love and hate. He who ruled scent ruled the hearts of men. Great insight into the mind of Grenouille, a classic anti-hero. So he observes, he smells, he studies. He's a scentless apprentice at a tanner in Paris, tanning these animal hides. Then the henchman of a master perfumer. And he's a journeyman, he's a cipher, right? He just hides in his work. He grinds, he just keeps his head down. He continues this way until he grows weary, and then he lives in a cave for 7 years, alone with himself and his thoughts and his collected scents, mixing them up in his mind. He literally like eats bugs and whatever he can find and drinks the water from the falling rocks and just like inhabits this dank, dark space for years. Finally, he emerges unable to live with just himself, especially because he doesn't have a scent. He realizes he has to create his own scent. There's, again, the whole existential crisis. So unable to live with himself, he emerges and he goes to this small town to continue his education. And when he smells another young girl who's just, blossoming into maturity, and the word blossom is very intentional, in bloom, so to speak, she becomes the final object of his obsession. She's not ready when he first smells her, though. He has to wait for a year or so while he develops the best method for trapping and keeping human scent. So for practice, he begins murdering young girls, young, beautiful girls, trapping their scents, distilling their pure essence. And this confuses everybody. It terrifies everyone, but it confuses them because they all remain virgins. All the victims have their virginity intact, so he's not killing them for that matter, but that's even more horrifying to them, because they could guess why he would be murdering young women for that reason. But they're still perfectly intact when he leaves them. And so everybody's completely terrified because nobody knows his motivations. Nobody has any idea because nobody has the power of that scent or that smell. Nobody can smell like Grenouille. Nobody can decipher what's going on. They just find these bodies of women with like shaved heads because the scent is in the hair, and all of them are beautiful. And so somebody it's kind of it's a pretty horrifying image, but a great setup. But he doesn't care about. He's not motivated by anything erotic at all. He's completely obsessed with the sensual nature of scent. That's his entire obsessive motivation. But nobody would ever know. When they finally capture him, he confesses to everything, flat out. He's like, yep, I did it all. Yes, absolutely. He has no emotion whatsoever. But on the day of his execution, he unleashes the product of his work and toil of all these years. He just puts one drop on his body, and he steps out of his carriage to climb up the scaffolding and get, broken apart with an iron rod by his executioner. And he's wearing one drop of this stuff. And there's 10,000 people watching him because they all know about the killer, and they come from all around, they travel there, it's like a big party. And he steps out, and immediately everyone smells this smell, his own smell, the one that he's been working on forever, and forgives him. Flat out, just like immediately, like there's no way he could be the killer, It not only inspires immediate forgiveness and erasure of his crimes, but almost immediately an orgy, right? Among the gathered 10,000 who had come to see him die. It's hysterical. I mean, it's like all of a sudden they're like weeping because this divine beauty has stepped in front of them, but at the same time, it makes them all like randy as hell, and they all just like start fucking in the dirt. All the peasants, but all the nobles as well, and everybody's just having this giant orgy, and Grenouille's just watching it like, oh man. It's understandably very, very depressing to him. Like, this is the culmination of his efforts, right? He's a god, but it doesn't matter. It just, he's reached the heights and surpassed them, and now he's just sort of like, this is disappointing. So he goes back to Paris and he walks into a graveyard, which is full of deranged criminals hanging out, just like, doing what people who hang out in graveyards in the middle of the night do. And he just douses himself in his perfume, and then they eat him alive. He's torn limb from limb by these love-struck lowlifes. So that's the end. The ending, while brilliant, is deeply, deeply cynical, and that's one of the most interesting parts of the book for me. Süskind creates the most solipsistic protagonist ever penned, who comes to the conclusion that while it's impossible to live with yourself, it's equally impossible to live with others. Finally, love is not real for him. right? Nothing seems to be real for Grenouille except the scent, and after that's achieved, after the masterful perfume is created, there's nothing left for him but to die, and die the way he lived, right? I think I read in an interview that Süskind said that like that was the initial image he had in his head, was just him, you know, dousing himself in that and being eaten a lot, consumed, you know. And then he kind of created the story from that. Patrick Süskind is a German writer and a notorious recluse. I've reviewed The Pigeon, which is shorter than this, and I believe was published after Perfume, which is about it's another existential crisis about a man whose entire existence, his entire reality is sort of shaken and broken by the appearance of a pigeon in his apartment building. Great book, very fast read, very enjoyable. That novel's a little bit more absurd or humorous. I think Perfume is charming, but it falls certainly more into the category of, you know, horror if you're to take it seriously. It's cloaked in this floral or precious aura, but, you know, don't let it fool you. That's the thing. That's probably, I shouldn't have put this off for so long because, you know, it's a terrifying story at heart. It really is. The final conclusion, the ending for Grenouille, could have easily come from, you know, the Marquis de Sade, right? Though I think Süskind has more tact. He's a better writer, you know. Süskind seems to be somebody who has tried to avoid the mainstream at all costs and yet has failed to remain obscure. Perfume has become an extremely popular book since its publication in the mid-'80s. Süskind says, you know, as long as I don't have an idea, I won't write anything. He said that in an interview in 1986. There's very little on him, you know, which I respect and admire. The strange thing about Perfume is that Grenouille's pursuit seems, it's described, or it kind of comes off as noble. Obviously it's not. It sort of comes off as noble, or at least sort of in your suspension of disbelief, sympathetic, you know, while he's killing puppies and rats, and young beautiful women trying to covet this pure essence of their scent. This is the power of the novel, again. It twists your moral compass a little bit because you want him to succeed. You know, you know he's been obsessing over this magnificent scent, this all-encompassing, godlike, divine scent. And you're kind of like reading what he does, and it's like, oh, that's terrible, but you still want him to. I mean, it's atrocious, but you still want him to succeed. Just to see what happens. In the film adaptation from a while back, he's played by this wafy, sympathetic boy, man boy, you know, who you immediately side with, you know, as he seems to be the underdog of the story. The beautiful, misunderstood kid who's cast aside and neglected, and that's all fine and good. I think you need to have that for the film version because, you know, my conception of Grenouille from the book is very different. He's a snake. Right? He's evil. He's like a great white shark hunting blood in the ocean. There's nothing kind or generous or noble about Grenouille. Nothing. Ever. Never once. Although what results from his obsession, from his single-minded drive, is something tremendously beautiful and, you know, by all rights, divine, right? Something astounding, something profound, something nobody has ever accomplished before, something that is good, you know, fundamentally incredible. But what got him there, you know, that's the complicated thing about life and the triumph of the book, in my opinion. There's beauty to be found in the worst things conceivable. That doesn't make them good or the right things to do, you know, but there is beauty in the worst things conceivable. I think literature is able to illustrate that brilliantly, you know, because two things like, you know, can be, you know, one thing can be two things at the same time if it's complicated enough. That's an idea back from Peterson that he was talking about, and I think that's really profound. And I don't know, maybe he got that from Jung or somebody else, but yeah, the fact that two things can be, or the fact that one thing can be two diametrically opposite things at the same time is confusing. And the book is great at concisely demonstrating that. concisely demonstrating what's confusing about life, about desire, about obtaining desire, about, or obtaining your goals that you desire, about succeeding in one way and hopelessly failing in another, about, the contradiction of life itself. It's impossible to live with people, and it's impossible to live without them. Our character doesn't figure it out. He just gives up in the most appropriate way possible. So again, it is for how pleasant the book looks on the surface, how kind of innocuous it seems. It's like, it's a very cynical ending, very deeply dark finish. For me, I always pictured, when I was reading, the antagonist from Haneke's, the original Funny Games, which, if you've never seen, that's a terrifying film. But the brown-haired guy with the brown eyes and the short hair, who's the main talker from these two guys who terrorize this family in Germany or Austria or wherever it takes place. He's kind of funny too. He's really disturbing. They're like very polite at first, and then they gradually, through these games, these social games of manipulation, they start terrorizing this family, these two guys. And one of them, the main talker, it was like the spinning image of the antagonist of Perfume for me, because he's so plain looking. He just looks like, he looks harmless, but of course he turns out to be the most evil, and that's what you gotta watch. Even in the callous acts of violence, the manner in which the story is told allows you to empathize with someone who, under circumstances, would be abhorred and despised, right? And this is the power of literature. This is the power of the book. It's why the book is great, in my opinion. Compare this literary murderer to somebody like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho, also a dog killer. You don't want Patrick Bateman to win. At least most of us don't. Bateman doesn't want Bateman to win. Bateman's miserable. He's miserable. He's more miserable than Grenouille, even. Grenouille is not Lucifer in Paradise Lost. Who is he like? He's more like the Judge, kind of. I think maybe that's the first one that pops in my mind. I got to think about that a little bit more. But the Judge from Blood Meridian. Nah, maybe not. I don't know. He's more mopey than that. He's more mopey than the Judge. The Judge is sort of proud in his sadism, or at least content in his sadistic nature. Who is Grenouille like? I was just trying to think of famous literary antagonists. Anyways, but Grenouille is like hopeless, but also has a task which can be seen in a certain light. I'm not saying it's good, or it can be seen as noble in some respects, but of course the manner in which the task could be seen as noble. His task to create the ultimate perfume, the perfume that expresses human love, that he can use to exist, to have an identity in the olfactory sense, to actually exist in the world, so he's not just ignored. That's admirable. That's an incredible task. The manner in which he does it, of course, by killing young, virginal, beautiful women, is like, well, atrocious. But he's not Patrick Bateman. No. He's miserable. More miserable than Grenouille. But that's the thing. I'm not even comfortable saying that Grenouille is miserable, because it's like, Grenouille doesn't know misery, as much as he knows obsession. Which is familiar territory for those of us with a single-minded goal, who are trying to achieve something big, larger than ourselves, something huge. A devoted mission, right? An indescribable longing to achieve something far greater than anything previously conceived or known. Grenouille is a representation of an artistic obsession at its cruelest, right? At its most indifferent to the suffering of others, where it sacrifices everything in pursuit of the final sensorial orgiastic experience, literally in this case. The ultimate sensual indulgence, right? The key in which lies access to something close to, if not divine, that will transport the subject from the base, disgusting, miserable confines of human experience into a realm of impossible beauty and forgetting of previous pain. And the fact that the girl's father, the girl, his final obsession, is trying to shield her away from him is both noble, as, of course, he's her father, but it's also selfish and greedy in a manner that is cleverly displayed. Because he wants to establish power in the nobility and have this growing family with a lot of political influence, right? She happens to be the key to all of that. So it's complex, right? Because he's motivated by selfless and selfish things. Both things at the same time. Grenouille is a cold, selfish murderer, and simultaneously almost an olfactorily messianic journeyman, hell-bent on creating the greatest scent in history. While Regis, the girl's father, is at once a caring and deeply frightened father, but also a selfish businessman with egotistical pursuits to be achieved at the exploitation of his child. It's like, this poor girl, you know, I mean, she just can't win. And all of this is just the beginning of the accomplishment that is Perfume. It's a great book, right? It's a sensual pleasure to read. It goes quickly, it's easy, just let it wash over you. All the sensorial description, the descriptions of the perfume process, of all these different methods of macerating these flowers and all of these different scents that go together of wood and spices and you know, all these wonderful descriptive terms, very physical again, very overwhelmingly felt. Masterfully edited and translated, it's a classic. So join me in getting into the Halloween spirit during this time of death and decay, followed by rebirth. Perfume. I think you'll enjoy it. Good stuff. Perfect book for this time of year. Especially when you have all these scents in the air, right? You know, like if you're up north, probably you have the leaves burning, so smoke is in the air, and then pumpkins and baked goods and spices and all these great things that come with fall. Dead wood and dying fruit. It's a very sensual season. Though here in Florida, it looks basically exactly the same. It's just, you know, the time is when the snowbirds come back, you know? So it's just, you know, old people. It's pretty smelly. It is what it is. I'll be getting there eventually. We hope. Perfume is better than food. I'm sure you guys are going to love it. Please enjoy. If you're going to purchase it, please go through the Amazon link below so the channel can get a kickback. Really appreciate it. Always remember, life is far too short to read bullshit. Please always keep that in mind and tell everybody you know. If you are a writer and you would like some critical feedback or just an opinion, you can send me your work. I charge $50 an hour for shorter material and about $1 per page or so for novels, but you know, of course, I'm reasonable and flexible with, you know, the time that I have. Also, if you would like to get access to my private vlog and some private patron-only reviews and early access to other reviews, including this one, this is going to be patron-only early access until October. I'm actually shooting this in the middle of September. Please head on over to patreon.com/booksarebetterthanfood. And you can donate an amount of your choice. All of it is sincerely appreciated, but if you donate $1 or more, then you can get access to all this awesome stuff. And yeah, I think that's all that's going on. Man. I'm really glad we survived that hurricane. Man, it was scary there for a second, I'm telling you, you know, it's like, move to a new place, set up a new house, get married, and then all of a sudden, you just, everybody's screaming at you, get the fuck out of there! Get the fuck, it's a Cat 5! It was like, you know, like all the women in my life were suddenly like, get the fuck out! You know? And we did. We went up to Atlanta. That's a beautiful city, by the way. If none of you have been to Atlanta, that's a gorgeous city. And we got off the 75, the highway. We went and drove through the Georgian countryside, which I never would have had an excuse to do before, but you know, that's old rusted tractors and praline pecans and pecan pie, sweet potato pie. Holy shit, it's so good. Peaches, of course. Glorious farms out there. And glorious countryside, just pure Americana. Just stunning. I love this country. I love this country. And Atlanta was, you know, I expected somewhere hard and southern and kind of intimidating or rough or whatever. I don't know. I had this impression of it. It was beautiful. It was very easy, very livable place. Everybody super friendly, big multicultural scene, great everything. I mean, like, you know, reminded me of the good parts of Portland, but southern and huge. And yeah, great. Loved it. Loved Atlanta. Hope you guys are doing very well. great to see you, of course. Please read something better than food. Keep in touch. Send me recommendations if you got them. Have a great day. Take care of yourselves. I'll talk to you soon. Have a good one. Read Perfume. Ciao.